I'm rewatching the video and I look very, very weird. This is me looking at myself in the camera. This is me looking at my paper of notes to the side. I'm not. Okay, this is just a note. Okay, so I am Ayana Miller, and this is my intern for my ethnic studies class. I did 2 presentations. I did one on Thursday for my BSU back in Buckingham High School. It was a mandatory meeting on Thursday, so it was mandatory, and had about 70 people show up. And the presentation was basically about what we do in the class and what we study and just basic things like that. So it was basically this video essay, but in presentation form. And then on Friday after school, it was a non-mandatory meeting. I had about 50 people show up, and that was my presentation on Ya Acentua. And yeah, so I explained it to them. There wasn't a lot of questions. Well, there was a lot of questions on my first presentation on Thursday. Most of them were just about, like, do you learn, like, typical things that you would expect a high school educated Black person to ask. Like, do they talk about the gold in Africa, like how Africa is actually rich in gold and things like that. And just like basic things, nothing too deep. Then on my presentation that I did on Friday, there wasn't a lot of questions because it pretty much got straight to the point and it was pretty straightforward. There was a lot of pronunciation questions, like how do you pronounce certain names and stuff like that, but not a lot of questions. They asked if they went into a regular ethnic studies class in any college, would they teach that? And I answered honestly. I told them that I don't know, because this class is extremely special in the types of material that we study and talk about. So I told them that I don't really know for other colleges, but if they took this exact class at Sac State, then yes, that would definitely be a concept that we would discuss. I think it's very beneficial for them to understand and learn that there's more to their history than just what they're teaching in high school. I personally love our high school teacher at Buckingham. We only have about three high school teachers at Buckingham. We're a very small school. But I personally love the teacher who teaches mostly in the African continent sort of history. And but his curriculum doesn't go into really what happened to us. It's more of like, the Atlantic slave trade, how we weren't very developed as a nation and things like that. I believe is very beneficial for them to, because Buckingham doesn't have a large Black population. We're not even a large school. Like, our graduating class was about 100 people. So we don't have a large Black population. Most of the people who are in BSU are just like other people of color or white people who want to learn more about Black people or want to support. There's about, I would say, 15 actual Black people in the BSU class. So it's very good for them, especially to know that they're not like lesser than, or that their history is not as fine as their friends. I would say that Afrocentricity is more of first, Eurocentricity is kind of like a branch. Like, they believe that things branched out from Europe, like beliefs, perspectives. It's basically like the worldview as it pertains to Europe. And Afrocentricity is the worldview as it pertains to Africa and African culture and things like that. It's kind of like a response to Eurocentricity. It's like, Eurocentricity is, how do I explain this? It's more of like, had things branched out from Europe? Like, best way I can think of to describe it is like, Eurocentricity views Europe's perspectives as the point of reference, as opposed to Afrocentricity, which is African history is the point of reference. And so they're actually not like clashing with each other. They kind of complement each other in a way. It's like Afrocentricity is a response to Eurocentricity, and they go kind of together. Epistemology and worldview are essential to the framework in which we, as individuals and societies, construct and interpret reality. Because they influence thought and action. Epistemology is basically the theory of knowledge. It's a branch of philosophy. Oh my god, philosophy that is centered around nature, sources, and limits of human knowledge. I think some of the fundamental questions that we ask in epistemology, I say that like I'm in a philosophy class, are what like constitutes as knowledge, and how is knowledge acquired and justified. Epistemology is basically like the standard for distinguishing belief. Epistemology is the standard for distinguishing between justified beliefs and opinion. This fosters critical thinking. Okay. And what's the word? It scrutinizes, yes, methods of knowing. Is it methods of knowing? Yeah, methods of knowing. This could be through like empirical observation, rational deduction, or other like epistemic ways. I said that. Yeah, I said that right. This is basically because they want us to evaluate the validity of like what we say, what we claim to know. The foundations of epistemology basically underpin different academic disciplines. In this guiding approaches to inquiry, shapes the methodologies within science, ethics, and other fields of studies such as that. And then worldview is an overarching cognitive and philosophical framework through which individuals and communities interpret the world. Okay? It's incorporating beliefs about reality, morality, human nature, and purpose. So this influences how we as people perceive our experiences or the experiences of others. And then we make ethical decisions based off of that and engage in, what's the word? Like bigger societal structures. Politics, that's what I was looking for. Politics, economics, religion. So it takes diverse, like worldview takes diverse beliefs that and values that like we all have and creates a unified perspective on life. This kind of poses I'm just gonna turn this off real quick. Oh yeah, can sometimes like be an answer to existential questions, ethical questions too. And then as a collective, shared worldviews shape the ideologies, values, and institutions of societies. Yes. And this can cause like cultural evolution. And then it could influence social media, so social and political systems basically anything. So epistemology, okay, governs the the processes by which we acquire and justify knowledge, while worldview informs the content and interpretive frameworks through which we make sense of the world. And both of them are indispensable. So, you can't understand individual cognition, and why am I blanking? Bigger intellectual currents that shape cultures and societies if you don't understand epistemology and worldview. Afrocentricity and Eurocentricity represent two contrasting intellectual and cultural paradigms. Oh my god, I'm going to say this right. Each carrying significant implications for ethical theory and pedagogical practice. Yes, these frameworks, both of these, diverge primarily in their conceptualization of history, knowledge, and production. Also cultural hierarchies. And then this shapes the way that we as humans understand our achievements and development. So Afrocentricity basically prioritizes the experiences, histories, and epistemologies of African people. Okay. Afrocentricity wants to recenter African identities and contributions that have been marginalized in history books. So Afrocentric education basically advocates for the centralization of African history, culture, and intellectual achievements as the focal point rather than the auxiliary and marginal consideration. So it basically challenges hegemony. It challenges the hegemony of Eurocentric historiography and emphasizes the agency of African civilizations in global intellectual, scientific, and physiological advancements. Whew. Got that out there. So Afrocentric pedagogy integrates African epistemologies, so they incorporate traditions, indigenous knowledge systems, and Afrocentric philosophies as a legitimate source of learning. The pedagogy is rooted in fostering cultural pride among African descendants. Basically, yeah. So Afrocentricity deconstructs Eurocentrism. I'm gonna get through this. Eurocentristic distortions of African history. So not just Eurocentricity, but just the distortions of African history. This is like the minimization of African empires, like definitely Egypt, definitely Ethiopia, Mali, things like that. It also interrogates the cultural and intellectual erasure. I think that's a word. Erasure, like that was caused by transatlantic slave trade, slavery in general, colonialism, and then the racialized subjugation of African Americans, or just Africans in general. Euros. I'm gonna get through this. Eurocentricity is an intellectual and cultural framework that privileges European history. And they think that their epistemology is the universal standard for human progress and civilization, as you can tell by all the history books that have, Western settlers and things like that. It basically positions Western civilization as the primary focus of knowledge and moral authority. And then they dismiss and devalue non-Western contributions, pretty much anywhere else. So Eurocentristic education foregrounds European history and intellectual traditions as a non-formative framework for understanding global development. They tend to represent European achievements in science, philosophy, and politics as a pinnacle of human progress, while relegating non-European histories to peripheral and inferior status. So Eurocentristic pedagogy often emphasizes formal text-based academic learning, individualism, and rationalism, with focus on Western canonical works. Ooh, I'm about to lose it. It generally prioritizes Western modes of inquiry while marginalizing or excluding non-Western epistemological traditions, creating an asymmetry in the representation of global knowledge. So Eurocentric pedagogy risks alienating students from non-European backgrounds. Why am I tripping over backgrounds? By disregarding their cultural heritage and intellectual contributions, it perpetrates a I knew what this was gonna happen. Hierarchical worldview that implicitly suggests the superiority of Western civilization, which can lead to psychological and cultural dislocation for students from marginalized communities. Afrocentricity foregrounds African historical narratives, oh my god, emphasizing African agency, intellectual anatomy, and cultural contributions to human civilization. Eurocentricity elevates European history as a dominant framework, often perpetrating a linear progressive narrative of Western superiority. They basically advocate for a more pluralistic and inclusive view of world history. Let's just say that. Okay. Eurocentricity tends to universalize Western cultural norms and values, positioning them as a standard for globalist civilization, thus marginalizing non-Western cultural perspectives. Afrocentricity pedagogy is oriented towards the decolonization of knowledge, and the reclamation of African identity and the promotion of social justice. So it seeks to basically empower people by connecting their learning to their cultural heritage and fostering critical engagement with historical narratives. And then Eurocentric pedagogy often reinforces established power structures and promoting Western knowledge as a superior and perpetrating narratives of cultural and intellectual dominance. I'm going to get this. So Afrocentricity and Eurocentricity represent competing paradigms of historical and cultural knowledge. Afrocentricity seeks to reorient education to foreground African perspectives and challenge the hegemony of Eurocentric narratives. Oh my god. And they advocate for a more equitable and inclusive pedagogical model. And Eurocentricity continues to uphold Western epistemologies as the default, often to detriment of a more diverse and representative understanding of global intellectual traditions. Yes. The concept of shattered consciousness. This is the theoretical framework that addresses the fragmentation and disintegration of an individual or group's coherent sense of identity, self-awareness, and perception of reality. Fragmentation often occurs as a result of systematic oppression, colonialism, trauma, or cultural dislocation. A shattered consciousness is a state where the person's ability to construct a unified and stable connection is undermined by external forces, leading to like alienation, is it disassociation, or internalized conflict. So shattered consciousness is closely associated with the work of Frantz Fanon. Yeah. And he was a renowned psychiatrist and anti-colonial theorist. He did works like Black Skin, White Mass, and the wretched of the earth. Yeah. While Fanon did not explicitly coin the phrase shattered consciousness, his writings explore like the psychological and existential consequences of colonialism and racism, which produce a profound rupture in the consciousness of colonized individuals. His theoretical framework examines how colonized individuals experience a fracturing of self-understanding due to the internalization of coloners' dehumanizing words, actions, anything dehumanizing, basically. And then this process like erodes their sense of self-worth and leads to psychic like disintegration of where their consciousness is split between like their indigenous identity and the imposed identity constructed by the colonial power structures. This is especially what happens a lot. We see it a lot in media, social media. And then there's a lot of core concepts, but there's psychic fragmentation, double consciousness, and alienation and dislocation. So psychic fragmentation is where the colonized person has a psychological fracture, and this is like where their self-perception is constantly mediated by the colonizers' actions, and then this leads to a fragmentation of an unstable sense of identity. And then double consciousness is, well, double consciousness was actually initially developed by, what is it, W.E.B. Du Bois. Was he French? Du Bois. It was actually Dubois, and I knew that. And he analyzed the African American experience, but then this was extended by Fanon to the colonized people, and then it's basically the conflict of seeing oneself through the lens of the oppressor or the colonizer, while simultaneously trying to have their own cultural identity. And then alienation and dislocation. This is like it's basically in the word. It's where like the person feels estranged from their indigenous side, and the imposed colonial side. And this is like when they have a dislocated sense of self that is not fully alienated but also not fully colonized. I was trying to think of an example for this. I think a good example would be like if you're like as a light-skinned person, you go on, like, I'm African, so if you go on to like any social media and you like look at African people, they're very dark, beautiful, with like clear skin, but it's like dark and stuff. And then like if you go look at light skins, they're like people with like straight hair and like blue eyes and stuff like that, so you don't really fit into either category and you kind of feel alienated, if that makes sense. I don't think that that's a good example, but that's what I thought of. And then shattered consciousness just is basically just the psychological consequences of structural violence, and cultural hegemony. But it can be examined. And it's basically how colonialism, it doesn't just affect materials. It affects people and fundamentally alters their mental and emotional landscapes. And this creates like multiple identities that often contradict each other. And the effects of this could actually be like multi-generational or intergenerational. I think that's the correct term for it. So it's not just the people who were the subjects of colonization, but also their descendants can inherit the residual effects of fragmentation. So in essence, his Fanon's work serves as a foundation for this concept, but was expanded upon later by post-colonial scholars, psychoanalytic theorists, I think that's the term for it, and then critical race theorists, who and it's continued to be added on to, but they basically explore systematic oppression and how it fractures and destabilizes individuals and creates a profound sense of internal disunity and essential dissonance. Dissonance. The significance of eyewitness accounts in the context of ancient Kemites and their relation to modern K-12 educational institutions is more epistemological. Yeah, that's a word. So eyewitness testimonies serve as an unmedicated contemporaneous perspective on historical events, cultural practices, and socio-political structures. In the case of the Kemites, these accounts were invaluable for understanding the intellectual, spiritual, and material contributions of ancient Egypt, which are distorted or overlooked within Eurocentristic narratives that dominate contemporary education. So eyewitness accounts often direct observations that bypass and filter later reinterpretation of the ideological dissertation. So if you're an eyewitness, they can't be like, oh, like, that's not what happened because it's an eyewitness account. Kemet. So Herodotus. So Kemet had Herodotus, and like other travelers, and they provided insights into what Kemetic customs, religious practice, and governance was. And then the perspectives that they provided were very crucial to reconstructing a more accurate representation of Kemetic society, particularly in light of historical misinterpretations by colonial and imperial powers. So modern K through 12 curricula are very much steeped in Eurocentristic frameworks that marginalize and diminish the achievements of African civilizations, including Kemet. Eyewitness accounts from antiquity serve as counter-narratives that challenge these reductions by presenting direct evidence of the Kemites' advancements in science, math, architecture, governance. And incorporating these accounts in the K-12 education can disrupt the hegemonic portrayal of history that relegates African civilizations to the peripheral role in global development. Yes. Eyewitness accounts are essential in reclamation of cultural heritage for students of African descent, especially in K-12 institutions. Learning about their ancestral contributions through authentic sources helps create like a greater sense of identity and pride. It also engages a more holistic understanding of history, where the African civilizations like Kemet are often seen as not static or primitive, but as the dynamic, sophisticated, and influential civilizations that they were, and how important they were in shaping human history. Introducing eyewitness accounts of ancient Kemet into K-12 pedagogy, this could make kids engage in their historical narratives. It allows them to differentiate between firsthand observations and later interpretations, fostering a more nuanced understanding of history, such as critical engagement helps students by questioning historical biases and recognize that the political dimensions of historiography. Yeah, I think that's how you say it. And then eyewitness testimonies about Kemet can diversify curricula, which are very much disproportionately centered around Western civilizations. The inclusion promotes an intellectual diversity and exposes students to a broader spectrum of human achievement. This combats the historical erasure of non-European contributions to global society, which we already know. And then the use of eyewitness accounts as education also enhances students' cognitive development, especially in K through 7th, because that's when your brain is still developing cognitively, frontal lobe, by teaching them the importance of sourcing evidence and perspectives in historical analysis. Why am I so far over here? Ethically, this can promote inclusivity and respect for others' cultural achievements within the non-European community. And this goes for all civilizations, aligning with educational practices and principles of equality and justice. So I know this accounts regarding ancient Kemites they're of paramount importance. That's what we're going to say. They're of paramount importance for both historical accuracy and also the deconstruction of Eurocentricity. Not just Eurocentricity, but Eurocentristic educational paradigms that are in basically all K through 12 institutions. And then these accounts offer vital tools for restoring the prominence of African contributions to human civilization while also fostering critical thinking and cultural awareness among students. Okay? If we incorporate these testimonies, educators can provide a more comprehensive and inclusive environment and understanding of world history, thereby empowering kids with richer and equitable perspective of their past. Yes.